My first steps into social work, how did I become a social worker? Lots of things really. I had an experience myself growing up in care from being young, and then obviously spending time in various children's homes, various placements, and then ended up in a mother and baby unit when I was 16 and pregnant with my first child. And some of the social work I received then wasn't good, didn't encourage me, looked to take my child away from me, and I felt that was wrong. I was quite clever and got myself some legal advice and challenged that decision and showed them that I could be a good mum, and ended up leaving care with my child. I think things have moved on a lot since I was younger, and the approach has changed. Wherever possible, they will keep children with their mums, they'll assess them together. It's a much more family environment, so there's a lot of foster placements now. Rather than putting all these young mums in one home, they go to a family that can support them with becoming a mum and the changes that's required of being a parent. I suppose that experience, and then I lived on a council estate with my kids and not much for them to do, so I ended up setting up a dance school just because I wanted to keep my kids off the street and out of crime really. I ended up becoming a youth worker because of that and getting paid quite well to do that, and working with lots of teenagers that were not always going to school, were getting into trouble with the police, lots of other things really, but that were on the periphery of coming into care. And I used to do quite a lot of direct work with those kids and that and family, and work in partnership with social workers actually, in terms of keeping them safe and giving them other alternatives other than, getting into trouble, I suppose. And that, for me, then sort of cemented that actually, I did want to work with these kids. I did want to work in a social work role. I'd never really thought of being a social worker before then, given my own experiences. I wasn't too keen. But actually, I thought, no, I can make a difference because I've been both sides. So that was when my light bulb moment, if you like. That's when it cemented that I wanted to be a social worker. When I became a social work assistant, I had opportunities to work with families directly, particularly children post-abuse. So doing some direct work with kids about how that had felt for them and moving them on so that they could function without this trauma. Sometimes they get a little bit stuck in terms of behaviours and how they function in society. I did a lot of work with families around looking forward and working with agencies that could support that, rather than the children coming into the care system sort of enabling those parents to manage those situations. That then confirmed for me that I wanted to work with children and families and become a social worker. So when the opportunity for a social work secondment to do a degree came up, I jumped at that. It was a personal achievement getting on the course. Nobody from my family had ever gone to university. I didn't particularly do well at school myself because school wasn't that important to me as a looked after child. Everybody talks about education being important, but actually when you've got lots of other things going on in your life in terms of your family and not being at home, it's not the most important thing. However, I did do well and I ended up getting a first. Which I was amazed at, to be honest. I just wanted to pass. But where I scored high was my placements where I were working with families and law, because law's fact and I like fact and I like to know where I'm going. I like a plan, and I think that's why I work well with families, because I can help them move on rather than just looking at the presenting issue. It's about, okay, so we've got this, how do we move it on? That's one of the skills maybe that I do have. I came into social work to help people, to work with the kids that nobody wanted to work with the challenging kids that people just thought, it's them, it's their behaviours, it's this, it's that. It's not. Sometimes it's about what's going on for them and being there for them, having that stickability, listening to them, really, really projecting their voice, really making sure that what they want, what their views are part of any plan, because this is their life. It's, when social workers do after removed children, and you know, that's a long process. It's not a quick thing, and there's been lots of things put in to support families before it ever comes to that. You've got to make sure that that child has been represented throughout that and has to be kept safe more than anything, and they are the experts in their situation, not us. So for me, it's about listening to them, working with families, trying to make that change. And I think if you've had some of those experiences yourself, although they're not exactly the same, you can empathise in how that feels and what the struggles are to get there. So you're more realistic in terms of your approach with families to make that change. And you know, you're not setting them up to fail, because you know, actually by asking them to do certain things, they're not going to be able to do that. That's not what social work are about. They're about keeping families together wherever possible, looking at alternatives within the family network if they can't stay with parents. You know, we believe that kids thrive in their own families, and research tells us that the last thing we want is to bring a child into care. That's not what we want, but yet that's the perception that some people have of social care. A typical day for me would be to get in between 8 o'clock, 8:45, usually 8 o'clock. Look on the system to see what's coming overnight and what's urgent, what needs to be sent to the area teams immediately for action. We then look at anything that we need to allocate to our team to get more information on, to speak to families, anything that we need to just sort of act on immediately. Then as we go through the day, I have lots of case discussions with social workers, with the police, with health, with education about anything they're concerned about with a child. I'm usually going into strategy meetings to talk about the high risk cases and to formulate a plan about how we might approach that with our partner agencies. Lots of typing, lots of recording what we've agreed, and then lots of phone calls to the managers to say, look, this is coming, this is what it's about, it needs urgent action, or actually this one needs an assessment, it can wait, and helping to prioritise what's coming through. On average, we take over 100 calls a day, so there's a lot of conversation, a lot of ad hoc advice, a lot of supervisions of staff, because there's the formal supervisions as well as the informal ongoing supervision and day-to-day stuff. There's meetings to attend, there's development meetings, there's managers meetings, there's case reviews, so we audit our cases every week to see, did we do a good job on this? Could we have done something better? So we do what we call an internal audit to make sure that we're giving a good service to the families of Kirklees. I would try to finish for the end of the day, which is 5:15, but I often work over, but I think that's any social worker works over. I don't know a social worker that finishes on time, ever. I'm a strong advocate for kids. I think that their voice needs to be first and foremost. We need to keep them safe, but also, wherever possible, we need to be keeping children within the family network. So it might not be possible for children to live with their parents, but what about auntie and uncle? What about grandma and granddad? There's a lot of work goes on now into keeping children within the family, and that's, research tells us that is better outcomes for children than the care system, and I'm a big advocate for that as well.